This video has no script. I'm going to be flinging ideas at you as they come to my mind. Plus, I also just need to have some sort of content in place because I haven't uploaded in like a month. So yeah, balance ideas and new weapon ideas and things of the like, just in general. I know none of us really expect anything of this caliber for when the holiday-sized update comes around. But yeah, it's fun to just list what you want anyway. So, here's some of my ideas personally. I guess first and foremost, for Scout, I had an idea to rebalance the Sandman. The way it is now, kind of just middle ground. It's like the stock bat, if you ask me. A lot of people say that it's like absolutely terrible and never ever use it ever. Mostly just because, well, they just see minus 15 health and think, oh, that's the end of the world. It really only breaks like 2 damage thresholds, maybe 3. So the minus 15 health isn't much of a downside at all. But the stun mechanic isn't much of an upside either. The only fun part about the Sandman that comes to mind is the fact that it's way funnier to beat somebody to death with a Sandman than it is with a fish, because if you beat someone to death with a fish, that's just 2013 being on repeat for those people. Most people who die to a fish every day probably haven't died to a Sandman in a long time. But anyway, I think I have an idea for Sandman on how we can make it viable and more interesting than it is right now. My idea is to throw away stun mechanics and slow mechanics altogether, which I think is what they should have done with from the beginning, and just make it do flat levels of damage based on how far away you hit the ball. The way it worked in the past, of course, the farther away you land the shot, the longer the stun would last, and if you landed a moonshot, you get the longest level of stun. I'm thinking taking that system back into effect, but just doing it with damage instead of with stun. So at point blank, for example, it would do like 15 or 20 damage, kind of like it does now. And at moonshot range, which I don't know the exact distance, but I'll probably get an answer and put it on the screen, it would do something along the lines of 80 or so, which would make it not only a great finisher tool, but also a good one-time, one-hit, long-range damage, bonk in the head as like an assist tool, where you wouldn't be super duper effective at long range and you couldn't exactly spam it, but it would be useful at least. And it'd actually be a pretty interesting counter to snipers, I feel. The next thing, the only other thing I can think of for Scout would be Babyface, because I love the Babyface and I have some problems with the Babyface. The way I work with it now is actually kind of decent. It's not too bad. It's not nearly as bad as people think it is. Now, not being able to double jump definitely cuts off a couple of your legs there, but it's something that you can play with, for sure, because you're literally the fastest running class in the game. Faster than Demo Knights even. So, using singular jumps and that high speed, you can dodge what you need to pretty well. And even if you do get hit, you do still have chance to hit them again. And it only takes 100 damage to reach full boost, and 50% boost you're the speed of a normal Scout. So really what you're doing is you're going up and down with your speed. It's hard to predict where you're going. People don't really know how to counter that. It's not totally foolproof, but it's really fun and it's a lot better than people think. I have a couple issues with it though. That system of dodging and going up and down does not work on fire, because you only have to be licked with one flame hitbox and you are guaranteed to be at your slowest, which at your slowest you're not completely vulnerable, but does take away the whole point of being fast and not being able to be hit. So I would change it to where the boost meter is more resistant to specifically fire damage, but every other kind of damage I think it works just fine with. And the other thing that I would want to do is I would want to give it a full-size magazine. Get rid of the magazine penalty, make it 6 rounds instead of 4. What I found is that if your cleaver's recharging, if you're running it with cleaver, or if you're using a pistol or something, if you're trying to get damage to build boost up, you're going to be doing it from about medium distance, which it's a decent way to build boost, but by the time you get close to start actually engaging in the fight, your magazine's empty because you just use it all to gain boost. So I think that giving it 6 rounds instead of just 4 would make it much more usable. Otherwise, I think the Babyface is totally fine where it's at. We're just going to skip on down to Demoman because I think Soldier and Pyro are pretty rounded out with where they are, class-wise. There are 2 changes I want for Demoman. 2 of them are both simple and short. I want the lock and load to be the absolute Achilles heel of the Engineer, because in my opinion, unpopular opinion, Engineer is just a little bit on the powerful side. It's just a little bit too easy to be successful as an engineer, and it's also too easy to completely shut down an entire map with just 2 or 3 engineers, forcing a massive Uber. But anyway, I digress. I think that the lock and load should have one stat, as it is now. That one stat should be the fact that when you destroy a building, it does not drop any gibs. In the sense of, like, it's just totally fucking annihilated it, and now the engineer has no gibs to pick up and rebuild with. Which wouldn't be super duper helpful, but it would be interesting if the engineer is in the process of setting up, or if he just put it there and he doesn't have a dispenser nearby, or he doesn't have any ammo packs nearby, and you drop his sentry gun and he has no way to build it back up so quickly, because without those metal giblets you're a little ways behind. And of course the other thing for Demoman is just make the Scottish handshake a market gardener. Not much needs to be said there. I'm not the first person to come up with that idea, and I'm not the last one either. Naturally heavy, we want a Fat Scout type unlock. We want to have something for primary slot that will replace the minigun to further benefit a heavy that is using a shotgun. Thing is, I don't really want it to be exactly what Soundsmith said, which is like a bandolier that you just put on and forget about, because I want to avoid that kind of thing. I want to have it where I don't want to have another situation where we have another danger shield, because for the thing with like danger shield or with Razorback, you throw it on, you forget it's there, and it does its own magic without you having to try. So I think that instead of having like a bandolier or something that he just wears, I think that his primary slot should be replaced with a riot shield that you can physically pull out and place down on the ground, or something of the like. Be something like the Berlin Wall. I don't know. I think that would be a way more interesting way to play Fat Scout, and be a viable way to play Fat Scout. If you had a supportive type shield that you could carry around instead of just wearing it on your back and not thinking about it. I think the melees could use some reworks, but I haven't thought about them enough to give any ideas on them. I just use stock fists most of the time, because when it comes down to pulling out the melee, it's usually time to meme, so stock fists is funniest. Especially when it comes to taunt kills. Holiday Punch taunt kills are nothing because they happen all the time. You never see a taunt kill with just your regular fists. You know, they actually make the finger gun shape instead of mitts, you know. Anyway, Engineer is where I have my strongest desires for new weapons. And naturally, I'm not the first person to think of these either, but I think we can all agree that this is something that he's lacking. For primary, he doesn't really need any more primaries, but I think that he should have one more primary that's more eccentric on just fighting and not really a gimmick, because he does have a lot of primaries that are based on fighting, but 2 of them are very specific with how you use them, in a sense of like you have to follow certain circumstances, you know, in a sense of it's not just shoot with bullets. It's not a simple system. It's reload mechanic and crit mechanic. I want something that kind of fits his whole Texas style attitude. Naturally, I'm talking about a lever gun of some sort. Yep, being me, I'm a gun nerd. I think Engineer needs to have a Winchester 1886. I say specifically 1886 because if you look at the other Winchester lever rifles, they're all great. I love them, even though they all seem very similar to a non-nerd like me. Simple rundown. 1866 is in black powder and fires a weak cartridge, kind of like the 1860 Henry that came before it. Wouldn't really work out too well. 1873 would be one of the most popular, but also firing a small sort of wimpy cartridge. 1876 was too obscure. 1892 was small pistol cartridge. 1894 was kind of just a hunting rifle, which would be interesting, but not the best. 1895 would be, although, 1895 would be alright. I guess it would depend. I picked 1886 because, well, TF2 likes to have big, stupid type, cartoonish type deals, and the 1886 is the one that fired the biggest bullet. So, naturally, that's the one I would go with. I'm thinking 1886 and something like 5110, which, of course, it doesn't come down to that level of detail in TF2, but I can dream. Plus, I just really, I'm addicted to Winchester 1886. Just like Adrian James Fitzgerald. Who is he? Well, I'm not brave enough to tell you. The other weapon unlock is even more obvious. Engineer has to have a single-action revolver. No questions about it. He has to have one. I don't think anybody was surprised by that, but he needs to have a single-action revolver. It's a bit difficult to pick, because for secondary, the pistol has a quick reload animation where it's always the same animation, as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for like a 6-shooter. That's kind of why I think a single action army, as awesome as it would be, wouldn't really work out, because those don't have swing out cylinders or anything like that. You'd have to load the bullets one at a time, which wouldn't really work out for a secondary weapon. If we wanted to make it a primary weapon, we could do something like a Colt Walker, because that's just a big ass fucking revolver. Like, it's I think total length is 13 inches and it's 4.5 pounds or something. It's a big fucking gun. It is the big iron. My issue with that is there's already enough primaries. Engineer has 3 secondary options, one of them being stock. So I'm thinking for a secondary, should go with a 1851 Colt Navy. I think a Walker is a little bit too big to be just a secondary. One reason why I'm picking this family of revolver is that in some of the modern reproductions, they have quick change cylinders, so you can pull the loading lever down, pull out a cylinder, put in a new one, and set it, and off you go. So you would be able to do a quick reload animation of just one set of moves like that, instead of loading one individual chamber at a time, which in itself would be extremely painful for a cap and ball revolver, which takes like 2.5 minutes to load in real life, one chamber at a time. So yeah, let's move on before I keep nerding out. Medic, I think I'm not the first person to think of this either, but I think that there should be something more battle medic eccentric, and I'm thinking a medigun that has similar healing to stock and has a similar uber rate to stock, but the uber charge benefits specifically the medic and nobody else, which seems a little bit selfish, but I think that it would be pretty interesting in a sense where when you uber charge, you automatically de-equip your medigun, and the only unlock slots that are available to you are your primary and melee weapons. And the Uber could do something similar to the Quick Fix, where you have self-healing that's really strong, and some resistances maybe, and maybe a little bit of a speed buff, and maybe a damage buff or something like that. But something that combos well with your primary and secondary fire, where your Uber charge is just you, and you go in and wreck shit. I think that would be balanced-ish. It would be more of a gimmick type fun thing, because let's be honest, if we're playing TF2, most of us are just playing it for fun anyways. You could go in, get a really strong Uber, kill a few people, but once your Uber runs out, then you're, well, not very well off. Of course, I want an amputator buff, and maybe a Vitasaw buff, but yeah, I don't know. I don't use those enough to justify one way or another. I have my own ideas for sniper nerfs or sniper changes or things of the like. I'm not going to get into those because I would rant for like half an hour on how I want to fix sniper, and enough people do that already, so I'm just going to call that a mulligan and we'll save it for later. One change I would like to see, though, is I want to see more sniper melees become prominent. Like, the Tribalman Shiv is like only there for people who have no other unlocks, pretty much. But yeah, that's its own thing. I love the classic. Keep it up. Last but not least, everyone's favorite Frenchman, or least favorite Frenchman, depending on who you are. My personal favorite Frenchman. I love Spy. I've picked up Spy quite heavily recently, and I've figured out issues with him. Naturally, anybody who plays Spy figures out issues with him. I think the biggest issue that comes across when playing Spy is that, okay, the way that the class was designed was it was supposed to be a case of if you found, you're fucked. And the goal was don't get found out. But over all of the nerfs over the years, it's become too easy to find the Spy. Like a Pyro has brainlessly, mindlessly tape down left mouse, flick it around, and Spy can do absolutely nothing about it, except maybe pester him a little bit from distance wimpy shots. Like, it's just too easy to make a Spy's job completely unaccomplishable. Like, even with the best unlocks and the best players, you'd still only really be able to pester him at that point. I don't understand how people do that. How is there still so much hate for Spy that you have to go out of your way to make his life hell just because you dislike him? Go do that to snipers. Don't bother the Spies. They have it hard enough already. I think Spy's kit overall is pretty rounded out. I think this class as a whole needs a rework. He either needs to be harder to find, or he needs to be better at defending himself when he's found, because right now he's too easy to be found and is very vulnerable when he's found. I think the disguises could use a bit of touching up to where it's more centric around acting, where you can do class animations and maybe fake shooting with blanks of somehow, or reload animation, scoping, revving, things like that. You know, everyone's already talked about that before. A lot of people who I've talked to about it before have been like, oh, the disguise kit is already awesome, you just don't know it. And I'm like, well, I have plenty of hours on Spy for one. I think the disguise kit is better than some people give credit. I still think it needs to do more. The only difference that the disguise kit makes is that you don't stick out like a sore thumb when somebody sees you in the corner of their eye. That's about all that a disguise kit really does to anybody who has more than half a brain stem. I think that you should be able to act more, and you should be able to fool the enemy a lot better, because I think that that's Spy's gimmick. Even if he's not as powerful as he used to be back in the day, let his niche be around acting and fooling the enemy and things of that nature, and just being a little devious little devil. Another thing, I think he absolutely has to have more sappers, and the red tape recorder needs a rework too. I had 3 ideas for sappers, and I'll try to make these quick. First thing for the red tape recorder, I think that the red tape, as it is now, the building downgrade system is okay, sort of, in some situations, but it's not good enough, because if the engineer is alive, then he can remove the sapper, and it's annoying, yes, but the only situation where the red tape comes into play is when you have no chance of killing the sentry yourself, and all you can do is downgrade it a little bit. I think that the downgrade should be a bit faster, so if you can distract the engineer, you place the sapper on, distract the engineer, and make it downgrade all the way down to level 1 in about 5 seconds or so. In that case, he would have to start setting up his stuff all again, even though that doesn't help a whole lot, because, well, if he's a turtling engineer, he's going to have not only 2 or 3 other engineers right nearby him to level up immediately, he's also going to have a dispenser nearby too, so I think that the red tape should also have a little bit more health. Oh, now that comes to mind. Pause for a moment. Let's go back to Pyro. Pyro, I think that the home wrecker needs to be nerfed. I think it's the stupidest thing on this planet. Like, Spies already have it. For one thing, Spy was put on this earth to counter Engineer. Now, Engineer is already strong enough as he is, and Spy is weak enough as it is. So, as a class to class, if there's only 2 classes there, it's already a pretty even match. Spy versus Engineer. Then you throw a Pyro into the equation. Not only is it heavily in the engineer's favor for the Pyro to be sitting there and sitting in the dispenser and taping down the mouse button so that no spy can touch him, but even if you do exactly everything right, you stab the engineer, sap his buildings, and you die in the end, or if you run away, if the Pyro has the home wrecker, all your progress was completely null, because you just one smack and it's all gone. Nothing's changed. It's stupid. You shouldn't have to deal with 3 separate enemies, those being Engineer, Sentry, and Pyro, to successfully take down a nest, because at that rate, it's way easier to just play an explosive class and blow it the fuck up. So I think that the home wrecker should be... I think that having it being an engineer-assisted weapon is helpful, but I think it does way too hard on Sapper. So what I'm thinking for home wrecker is to make it take 2 swings to remove a Sapper, and make the swing speed much slower, to where if you stab the engineer and sap his building and shoot the building and the Pyro kills you, he won't have enough time to go over and unsap it. He would have to unsap it quickly after you die, or after you leave, or after you sap it, so that would more akin to bad gameplay on the Spy's part for not sticking out to the end there. That would be a little bit more balanced. Anyway, back to where we were. A new sapper. Something that you can throw. Engineers love putting their sentry guns on high up precarious spots that are impossible for anybody to touch. Only thing you can do is shoot it with a direct hit. Even though Spy, once again, Spy is supposed to counter Engineer, he can do nothing about it because he can't reach it. He has no mobility, especially vertical mobility, to get into some funny sentry places. So, I'm thinking a sapper that you can throw probably not super far. It probably would equate to about the gas passers type of throwing power, or other throwables of the like. And if you hit the engineer's building, or if you slide it across the floor in a general area of where the engineer's building is, it'll sap the building, and it'll just disable it and it won't do any damage. That way, if it's in a spot where the engineer can't reach, he can't unsap it himself, the team can push in and get it, something of the similar. And a Pyro can't get it either, unless it's like a very clutch detonator jump up to it and smack it with a home wrecker or a neon annihilator. That would be a more team-centered sapper that wouldn't just do damage, and I think that would be a very nice addition to it, because if we're not going to disable engineers' ability to place sentries in stupid spots, then we have to give a stronger counter to engineers who place their sentries in stupid spots. That would also let you, if an engineer is being particularly cheeky with his spot, in a spot where you can't really push into because everyone's there, you can corner peek, throw it, and that would allow your team to push in and take it out. I think that would be nice. A similar idea is just a sapper that does no damage but takes like 3 times as long to remove. Also a team-based sapper. Maybe this could be the same sapper weapon. Make the sapper have way more health, to where if you sap the building with it, your team pushes in. If you're working with a team, then the sapper would be much useful there. Otherwise, for spy, I would like to see, but also don't want to see at the same time, the Dead Ringer to be reworked. Oh, hold on, don't yell at me yet. I think the Dead Ringer, as it currently stands, is balanced, but as it currently stands, it's also boring. Because the way that it was designed to do it before, it was supposed to fool the enemy into thinking that you had died when in fact you had not. And the way it is now, because of the nerfs, is that if you dead ring, nobody's fooled by that. Everybody knows that you feigned your death, unless you pull off something super duper neo. Particularly based on the fact that kill sounds exist, and at least for me, whenever I kill a Dead Ringer spy, the kill sound doesn't play. If he feigns his death, the kill sound does not play. So that's also an issue. I think that the only thing that Dead Ringer is useful for now is, oh fuck, I'm gonna die, I need to get away. And even if the other team knows where you went, or has an idea of where you went, they can't really do much about it because you have high resistance. What makes it balanced is the fact that you can't do it over and over again. You can only do it once, and then you have to wait for it to recharge on its own. So I think that, as a flip-flop, should lighten the resistances, and give us back the ability to fake a death, and use good movement to get out of a situation without being completely invulnerable. I think that when you feign, you should have less resistance than you do, but you should have the movement speed, very little cloak shimmer, have a very quiet decloak too. Would make it to where if you just walk in a straight line after you dead ring, then you're gonna get killed. But if you are careful with your movement, you can get out and actually fake a death. And I think that would be a much more interesting way to use it, as opposed to the right click and get away. Doing one more comb over of all the unlocks that I can think of. Oh yeah, back to Scout real quick. Backscatter, I think that it could be reworked. I think that I think it's balanced, but it's really stinking boring how it is. It's just stock, very slightly worse. So rework it in some way or another. I don't know how to, but yeah, something like that. I think the Huntsman should have a thing where you can't get crits unless it's fully charged, because if someone just clicks on your head while you're up close range, then you get crit and die. That's stupid. Airstrike could be stronger. Not totally sure how. Equalizer could be buffed up. I think the Iron Bomber needs a rework. It's a similar position as the Backscatter of it's viable but really boring. Naturally Caber, but we all knew that. Overdose, Buffalo Steak, Enforcer, make it a building buster like Silent Smith said, and buff the Pomson and the Bison. Yeah, that's pretty much all she wrote, for me at least. Like, comment, share, I don't fucking care one way or another. So yeah, I'm here, I'm alive, I promise. I'm trying to make some stuff for you. Yeah. Bye.